aspect of magnetic energy is called surface area. Just like the speaker, the cone area, you're trying to push more air, so the more surface area you have, the more output you're going to have. Same thing with magnets, believe it or not. The more surface area on the magnet, the better it couples to the poles, the top plate and the bottom plate, the stronger the magnetic field. So that surface area basically is this area right here and right here. That's where this magnet bonds to the top plate or it bonds to the back plate. So the more contact we have there, the more energy gets focused back into this gap. Now we start talking about the magnetic gap, and this is really the biggest performance factor of any speaker, and that's where the most losses occur. That's because there's an air gap. We know from playing with magnets when we were little, I hope everyone did this, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but you take two magnets and you take like poles, like a north pole and a north pole, or a south pole and south pole, you start pushing them together. The closer they get together, that stronger that force is wants to push them apart. So if you can force these together really, really tight, you get a really strong magnetic field at that gap. The farther they come apart, the weaker it becomes. So that's why when you look at this magnetic circuit, and if we follow the magnetic circuit, basically it goes through the top plate, down through the magnet, through the back plate, up the pole piece, and that is the magnetic circuit. So we break any of those areas and we lose magnetic efficiency. Like I said, if we don't have a good bond, or we got a gap here between the back plate and the magnet, or a gap between the top plate and the magnet, you're going to lose some of that magnetic energy. But more importantly, you have something called the gap. And you hear you start looking at teal small parameters, you look at the width of the gap, the height of the gap. All of those have a really, really huge influence on how much a speaker can move and how much strength it has. Now, magnets are measured in something called BL. It's like horsepower. So the higher the BL, the stronger the magnet. And to get a higher BL out of a magnetic circuit, you want this gap as close together as possible. The problem is you have a voice coil that's moving up and down inside that gap, and it's a lot longer than the gap, so if it gets twisted sideways, it can rub. And if you guys have ever heard a speaker rub, that's that scratchy noise you hear when you start playing, lower frequencies, or even a upper frequency in a mid-range. If it starts getting really scratchy, nasty sounding, that's because that voice coil is rubbing on the top plate, or it's running on the pole piece itself, causing noise. So this gap right here is very important. If we make it too small, we're going to have great magnetic performance, but you've got a speaker that's very susceptible to causing noise and actually scraping through the windings of the voice coil and burning up. And if you make it too big, the speaker doesn't become as powerful. You don't have as much BL because the gap is much wider. So that's why this gap is probably the most important next to the surface area of the speaker in controlling the power that the speaker has, and once again, the performance and how much push it has both in and out.